Okay, second half, T side. Let's take a look. Skip over. Black screen should come off. There we go. All right, pistol rounds. Got armor. This guy's deagling cross. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you're just going to run out A, it makes a lot more sense to run out A ramp. I don't know if you're playing with a stack, but I assume you're just duoing here. If I'm, that's the assumption I'm going to run on. If you're just going to run out without any utility, you probably don't want to run out Palace because it's just so easy to go wrong. You can get picked from people's stairs or connector or jungle rather before you're even out. If someone's under balcony, if they're doing an A stack, it's really tough to deal with. And if someone's ticket, he should still get at least one minimum, probably two. There's not really a lot of upside. What you want to do for a Palace pop, you can have a right side smokes are really effective. So a smoke for jungle, and a smoke for stairs, and then flashes over, and then you run out and you push CT. That can be really effective, especially with 4 players. But I think you did it with 3. Yeah, the one guy ramp, I thought that I saw someone going the other direction as well, but I could be wrong. With 4 players, it's effective. 3 is drastically worse than 4, though, if you only had 3. You know, I can't... sometimes your team is going to say to do it, and there's nothing you can do. But I would recommend against it if it was like a discussion. Just rushing B is just kind of idiot proof. People try and get a little bit too like cool about it. T sides mostly go B. However, CT sides, in my experience, typically don't communicate enough to stack B on a consistent basis. So even if they know you're probably going B, it doesn't really change anything. You got to be careful with how fast you're shooting your Glock. Let me see. So yeah, it was 3. And then if you are going out A, by the way, you just have to commit. You just have to send it. You have to jump out and just go. You can't try and duel. You're just gonna that's just allowing them time to rotate, and it's a duel that you shouldn't be winning. You are spraying your Glock a little bit. You can shoot your Glock pretty quickly, but you're not trying to just spam click. Like, this is really inaccurate. Like, there's a lot of luck involved if you get a kill shooting that quickly. It wants to be more like tap, 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 or even a tiny bit slower than that potentially. Then at the end, the death, you can't really prevent that. Here, Tech 9. Tech 9 is a good pistol. The thing is, as a pistol, it's more of a gun that you buy when your team knows what they're doing. So if your team is going for something like a B hit or like a Palace pop, then the Tech 9 can be strong. But it's not the greatest at like working a pick and taking mid control at super long range. It's kind of like working a pick in a certain way. I would really much prefer a Deagle or even a P250, potentially in that scenario, over a Tech 9. In the scenario where you don't have a strat, where you're not fighting close range or, you know, trying to like take space, if you have time to kind of stop, I would generally be buying a Deagle. The Tech 9 isn't terrible, and I suppose if you're just really comfortable with the Tech 9 and really uncomfortable with the Deagle, it's not like the end of the world. But just as a general concept, I would be much more into buying the Deagle in the scenarios that you've been using the Tech 9 so far. It's just those are situations where the Tech 9's biggest strength is that you are essentially fully accurate while running. And so it's really great to cover distance to close the gap between you and an opponent, right? But when you have the time to stop and shoot, the Deagle is, in my opinion, often more effective. You're also spraying the Tech 9 a bit, which at those ranges is fine, but you want to make sure you're shooting a little bit more slowly if you're at a longer distance. All right, so there's the smoke. A lot of the time it would be on you. I'm guessing you threw a flash because you only had a molly and a flash there. Yeah, so there's the flash. The flash you want to throw is just step a little bit forward and throw it at the lamp flash. You can throw a couple of lamp flashes, I think, or you throw the first one and then the second one you aim a little bit higher so it lands up here instead of over here. But usually I throw 2 lamp flashes. And then you guys cancel. There's nothing wrong with canceling, but usually if you use as much utility as you need to take A, typically you want to be getting out. The problem is your team wasn't committing out, right? So what the typical thing that happens when you're on T side and you're not going out first, your team is going to have someone, usually the first player or 2, that just come out to Tetris and just sit there. This is a shit spot because it doesn't actually take any space. And if someone's under balcony, they can still flash off and peek out. If they're default, they can do the same. They can have teammates flash over and peek out of that. There's just a million things that can go wrong with that. So what you need is your teammates to be going out like this and actually taking space. But typically teammates don't do that. And that's why I tend to try and be one of the first players out in these situations. Because I feel that if I lead first, we're more likely to actually do a coherent strat, as opposed to if a teammate leads first and they just try and play for themselves and they just go Tetris. That's also why I'm not a huge fan of, there's nothing wrong with AXX on Mirage, but I find that people go for them too often, given that they have no idea how to go for an AXX. I would much prefer your team go for mid control more often, because with mid control, you can take mid control while playing for yourself, essentially. There's nobody has to lead out first in the same way you do have to lead out first in like a B hit or an A hit, where you have to like sacrifice your own ability to kill people in order to get your team to cover some space. You don't have to do that in middle, and then you can have a lurker on either side, and everyone can essentially be playing for themselves while still having a coherent strat. By the way, I don't think you did anything necessarily wrong. I'm not a huge fan of going to bench right away. I think clearing out the site and like getting here or here and like getting flashed through can be very effective, or something like that. But going bench isn't the end of the world. It's not a terrible play. That flash, by the way, you need to run throw it, otherwise it doesn't go far enough over. And it's a window flash, so it primarily is to get people here and in window. So you need to have people like going out with it. And here, your team is. This is really just the problem I have with like low rank games, is that everyone thinks that like the 5-man battering ram is the way to play. And so it's like, we're going to go A, okay, cancel, we're all going to go mid together. Okay, cancel, we're all going to go B together, right? It's not really how the game works. Generally, getting map control as a team is the most effective thing to do. Or sorry, map control is more split, where it's like a 1-3-1. Right, something like that. Generally, that's more effective if possible. So here, this time your team's going for mid control. 1 underpass. Yeah, typically you don't want to really run 2 underpass. 1 should be fine. You got to be worried about that smoke key through, because it can be used as a one-way. Someone sits on top of the little dresser there, and even though it looks like you can see them, you definitely can't see them. Then here, so the problem is that like, yeah, it's just taking a little too long, which isn't necessarily on you, but it's like you guys are sitting here waiting for your team to come back from mid all the way over, and with no pressure anywhere else on the map, and never having had a player on the A side of the map, there's great opportunity for them to just push through everything and come behind you, right? Or one of your teammates makes a footstep and it ends up being super obvious. So generally on a team level, you should probably, you should have gone A here. Your team's controlling mid. It's a lot easier to push A than it is to push B. Pushing B, you're kind of like, if someone's there, you're at a pretty big disadvantage. Whereas with A, there's 2 angles they could be at. So pushing A when mid control happens is a lot safer and just a more standard play. So if you're going to have one person on one side, You'll see pro teams will even, sometimes they run only nobody towards B, because, if you run someone towards B most of the time, then they shouldn't be pushing ever, right? But, like, you can see how obvious this is, right? Your team isn't doing anything in middle, and this is the round you set up towards A. Well, of course, right? And they can see that you're not really doing anything towards middle. At least there's throwing a bit of a fake, but one smoke is not really much of a fake. In fact, this type of fake can sometimes be even obvious that it's a fake, because you're missing so much that you're supposed to have that it's just like, dude, they would never be hitting with this type of play, right? So, like, individually, I feel like you're doing a lot of things right. The way you're taking gunfights is generally okay. The problem is that you're just it looks like you're trying to be supportive, but you're ending up putting yourself into all these really weak positions because you're trying to support a team that is playing in just this really nonsensical manner, right? And so you're never into these positions where you can actually get things done. Right, in this round, you threw a bit of utility, but you were still one of the first players down the mid ramp, and you got to fight on a player connector that was relatively beneficial, and it went well for you. And rather than peeking back towards the guy window, I would have preferred you went up cat, but I mean, it's kind of like fairly close in how strong each idea is. It's just, you get the kill on the guy window. It doesn't matter that much. Your main way to win the previous round was to force your way up cat and actually take the B bomb site. Maybe you kill their B player, get into an after plant, but it's not a bad play in general. You were kind of like 2v4, you're kind of desperate at that point. So the Magisk smoke you just threw is a strong smoke. Part of the problem, part of the potential problem is you don't want to be someone that, like, you only throw that smoke as a fake. Your opponents can read into that, but, I would assume your opponents aren't probably reading too much into it. So it did draw something. So I like it as an idea. And then, your team's dead on the other side of the map, unfortunately. So you have to rotate back over. You get yourself a kill, hit on the second player. You got to, basically in this situation, you actually have to... You have to make a decision. Is this guy going to re-peek on you or not? If he's likely to re-peek on you, which he never should, and any decent player should know that, right? I mean, the problem is if he's, not really bad, he might re-peek, right? But any decent player should not be re-peeking. And so typically my play in this scenario is to begin to push out, but using boxes on site as cover. And that way your opponents are thinking that he made contact with you. You're probably not fighting them because he could trade. But if, for example, you use this box as cover, you can peek out towards someone, for example, jungle or someone connector, while this box is being used between you and this player to prevent him from killing you. And then that can oftentimes be chained into a double kill. And this is, how kind of high level situations sometimes get into mind games where you peek out here, you kill this guy jungle, this guy peeks out to trade, and you peek back and kill him knowing that he's peeking out to trade. So you kind of have to make the decision in this scenario, is he going to re-peek or not? If he's going to re-peek like he did there, then you can afford to post on him to some extent. If he's not, then you definitely want to be going for another kill. If he is... sometimes I would still, want to use, I would want to move forward, because even if you killed this guy here, because you were so far back, there wasn't much you could do. These players in these angles would just destroy you. Whereas I feel like if you got out to somewhere like here, and then you peek back and killed him, maybe you can kind of use your position this close to catch another player off guard in one of these angles, but it's not a great situation regardless. If you have an AK, this is what you might want to do. Like, that would be a good scenario if you killed the guy CT from a little closer, because then you can transition it into multiple kills. With the scout, it's like you almost want to be further away because, you might not kill him in one shot, and you'd have to reset, and so it becomes this really awkward scenario. And then here, I notice a lot of people in matchmaking generally play a little bit too, like, oh, he just destroyed you. they take too long to throw exec. So what they do is they do like, I'm going to smoke here, and someone else is like, I'm going to smoke here, and then you throw a molly, and then you throw a nade, and then by the time you even get out, this player is already rotated over, which like you don't really want. Obviously, you can't always help that. Sometimes a fast rotate's going to get there. However, optimally, you want to bust out as quickly as possible and prevent the rotates from getting there. And this is especially true in scenarios in bomb sites where your opponents are likely to only have one player, and or retaking is really challenging, and B is a spot where they're likely to only have one player and retaking is very challenging, because the most important thing is that you get control of the bomb site, not that you lock off the rotates in an otherwise already hard to retake site. You know what I mean? Here, unless you're doing a palace pop, you never really want two in palace. It's just the second player just gets nothing done. The main benefit you have is for the first player to like catch someone off guard if they're just lurking, which is something you've never had with mid control, but is the like someone lurking ramp or palace or ramp and palace while going with 3 players for mid control is one of the most effective things you can do on Mirage. I get so many kills lurking out A when my team is taking mid control. It's just very hard to hold A when your team is taking mid control. Now, if you're playing players that are playing 2A, which at a lot of, lower to mid ranks in matchmaking is very common, then maybe it's a little bit less effective, but you still generally want a guy in that general area to at least control space, and then you can split into A, right? Because if they have 2A instead of 1 connector, then mid is really easy to take, and connector is really easy to take. And then with connector control, you can split into A pretty effectively. Here, you have to actually know that while holding mouse 1 down, they can hear this. This is an audible tell. So you don't want to press mouse 1 on your molly until you're throwing. You just click it. And then the peek after that peak is fine in theory, but because your team is so telegraphed in what's happening, there's already a guy rotated over there. And so in this specific scenario, this is actually a bad peak, even though in general, that peak is totally fine, right? That peak is what you need to do. What else are you going to do? Well, in the case that your opponents are already rotating because your team is taking so long, that's a problem. And similar thing here, you start with the smoke out, which means they throw counter utility, and then once they've thrown counter utility, then you're trying to run through it, and look, their whole team is B right now. Like, 4 players get B before even the second guy gets towards the balcony. It's just never going to work, right? It's much more effective to just throw a flash over and bust out. And the thing is, I think because you had been running this type of like, we just wait and then we execute a little bit later strat the whole half, because that's had been what you had been doing the entire half, they were just ready for it, and then they weren't throwing any utility at the start, and you have to be able to react to that as well. If they're not throwing utility at the start, if you're playing with randoms, you can't always tell them, you can't always make calls. It seemed like someone was making calls there. And what you can do is you can be like, guys, can we just go for mid control? You can just suggest things, especially in scenarios where they're not throwing utility. You say, guys, they're not throwing utility. Can we just bust out? You can make suggestions. You can't always tell your team exactly what to do if you're playing with random players, but you can definitely suggest to them the idea behind the right play, and hopefully they'll begin to make it a little bit more effectively. And then if I was you, I'd be a little bit more trying to lead the push than throw utility like you have been, because obviously when you're leading the push or when you're throwing utility, you're just getting put in unwinnable positions, in unwinnable gunfights. So on T sides, I'd focus more on trying to get your team to run defaults, trying to bust out more than throw these calculated full set execs that you really don't see in high level pugs very often. If you look at a high level pug, you'll see first flash coming over into the bomb site is much quicker, like drastically faster, miles faster than what you've done there, because generally, especially against pugs, that's the most effective way to do it. But even in competitive games, generally you're going to see, if your opponents have thrown very little utility, you're going to be busting in, trying to get ahead of their utility. If they've thrown a lot, then you can do a full exec, but usually there's pressure on the map elsewhere. It's very rare for a team to set up 5 players towards one side, wait, and then throw a full exec like that. It doesn't work. You almost always have someone on the other side of the map making it look like a standard default, maybe pressuring A, pressuring whatever, and going from there. And then for you, when your team is going for mid control, I would recommend going for an A lurk instead of going with the team or going towards B. But really, I hate, I hate when I see like this much of XX, because it's obviously people that care and people that are trying, but unfortunately it's caring and trying in the wrong way, and it's a misguided way that you think is effective but actually isn't really how higher level pugs are played.